Hey guys, I want to welcome you to another episode of the Advisory Podcast. I've got a good friend of mine and a rock star in the industry. I guess I can't say that after the Super Bowl ad anymore, though, can I? An amazing, talented person in the franchising industry, Aaron Harper. And I'll do a quick intro, but I'm gonna let him tell you guys a little bit about him because we're going to talk about what are some of the key lessons that emerging brands need to know about how to launch successfully. And Aaron's been in and around the franchising service industry for many, many years. His most recent role before founding and becoming the CEO of Rolling Suds was he worked for a home service brand, Patch Boys, and was instrumental in helping to grow them up to about 300 units. So from not very many to where they were in a very short amount of time, respectively. But the beauty of it is he didn't just sell them all. This is very common, like, oh, I've got 300 territories. So, but they were almost 100% deployed before you left, right, Aaron? Like it was
Yeah.
sold, deployed. And that's why I wanted to bring you in here because a lot of people struggle with that. They'll sell a bunch of units. They're like, I got 100 sold and I've got 10 open. And I think,
Yeah,
oh, you were in trouble, dude. So
totally.
why don't you tell them a little bit more about you and then we'll jump into the topic today.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for asking me. Little jealous I'm not in the snow, gonna go snowboarding where I was with you a couple weeks ago when we hung out, but
Yeah.
Nashville will have to do for now. But yeah, so I've been in the franchising space for years. Like you said, in the services industry. Um, Started in franchise development and have now become a franchisor for a brand. Um, First brand I worked on was ChemDry, long-standing carpet cleaning business, actually headquartered in Utah, near you, up
Yeah.
in Logan. Um, Grew that brand pretty rapidly over a course of a few years, and then that company was purchased by Belfour Franchise Group. And then I stepped into a leadership role at Belfour Franchise Group, and they acquired a brand called the Patch Boys. The Patch Boys at the time was an emerging franchise system. It had 100 locations, about 40 franchisees. When they acquired it was June of 2020. There was not a management team in place.
Hmm.
So they handed it to me to develop. And I had learned very quickly that it needed some infrastructure to be added to it.
Yeah.
And so before developing the brand, me and brand president went out and got to know the franchisees and asked them how we could help them. Very similar to what you're talking about, 100 units had been sold. Support wasn't there in the way they expected it to be.
Mhm.
And then we basically needed to help them grow their business. And as we got to know them in June of 2020, we built systems around everything they needed. And then when we launched, or when I felt like it was ready to sell and to award new franchisees, which was the end of 2020, we then opened it up. We launched our first location in the end of 2020. And from the end of 2020 to the end of last year, so almost exactly 24 months, I had stepped into full-time franchise development at the beginning there, or end of 2020. And I sold 223 franchise locations across the country, which was a total of 85 franchisees.
Yeah.
Um, so no one got more than 3 territories, no one got less than two.
Mhm.
And what I'm super proud of is every one of them opened.
Yeah.
Um, and everyone was advertising in every one of their territories right out the gate. What I'm also super proud of is every single one of them opened and was doing jobs in their marketplace the first week back from training, and every one of them had a full-time technician hired prior to going to training. So we were taking people who knew nothing about drywall repair, putting them into a system that we had built, and they were entering that business and doing tens of thousands of dollars per month, their first month, 2 months, 3 months back from training.
Wow.
And so it was really exciting. when I
Yeah.
when I left, a new franchisee was signing up about every 8 days. And every 6 weeks, we were launching 7 franchise groups in their markets across the country. Um,
Wow.
So I decided I could do this on my own, and I started to look for a business that I could franchise. Um, Looked all across the country at tree businesses and dog businesses and anything in the mobile service space. I met the founders of Rolling Suds in September of 2022,
Mhm.
and we finalized the deal in January to partner and to kind of grow this power washing business. It's a residential and commercial power washing business that's been around for 33 years. And to grow that now into be the biggest power washing company in the world. So we announced about 6 weeks ago that we were franchising, took it to the market, and
Yeah.
we signed up our first franchisee last week. So
Nice, dude. Well, first of all, congrats, because that's such a great
thanks.
experience. But I want to highlight something that maybe people aren't hearing, that just to make sure they
Yeah,
recognize the value of having you on this episode. Rather than being the founder, right? Founders, you guys are amazing. You work your butts off. You build a brand. You're an expert in this field, and usually inept and uneducated about how to be a franchisor. Like that's part of the pain. That's why we're doing this podcast, right? You're listening because you want to know how to become this rock star. Can't say that amazing, talented, franchisor, right? But Aaron is that, and then found a brand that he could become this amazing franchisor with. So he's like lifting this knowledge and this experience he's got about how to do it right and then dropping it on a brand. And I fully anticipate, Aaron, 2 to 3 years from now, you're probably going to take the same model, lift it, and then drop it on another brand because the model that works. And there's a
right.
crazy amount of and the reality is you're changing people's lives and helping them become owners, and they're becoming financially independent and wealthy and building empires for their families. Like there's something super powerful and
Yeah,
rewarding about being in franchising.
yeah,
It's something I love about it. Like I don't feel like I get up in the morning, I'm selling widgets, and I go to bed wondering why I'm doing it every day. Like I love this. Um,
yeah,
but guys, listen up to Aaron because we're going to talk today about what are the key components to a successful franchise brand deployment. Like, what do you need to really succeed and not just selling units? And he'll talk about that. He knows, but we'll also talk mostly about how do you deploy them? How do you structure your team? How do
right,
you set up? What is it going to cost? Like all these different factors in being a successful franchisor that a lot of you are founders are lacking. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but you don't know. It's a new world. So
right.
listen, because Aaron's going to coach you a bit on this.
Cool.
Yeah. So let's dive into topic one, man. So talk about the support because you mentioned this when you were at Patch Boys, you realized there wasn't really much of a support staff. If you wanted to get those 60 that have been sold that hadn't been deployed yet out and also sell and successfully deploy the rest, you needed to have
Right.
it in place. Let's start there. What does a successful franchise system need as far as infrastructure and team members to really be successful?
Well, yeah. So there's what I would tell people when I was looking at different businesses to franchise last year is basically in my case the power washing business, and then there's the franchise business. So those are two separate businesses.
Yeah.
They require different infrastructure, different roles and responsibilities, different budgets, different expertises, different skill sets. They're completely different businesses. And what some people I would talk to would say, well, I have a successful tree business. Why wouldn't people just buy that tree business and then they would have a successful business?
Uh,
And um,
yeah.
there's a lot more that goes into it. Makes perfect sense to me that people would think that, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So I
Right.
think one of the things that any kind of emerging franchisor needs to think about is capital. Um, Typically with launching a franchise system, depending on how you get franchise units sold or awarded, most of that income that comes in typically goes back out in fees and different expenses. And so the capital and what's needed to like support franchisees and grow the system can be anywhere from $500,000 on the low end to $2 million on the
Mhm.
high end, depending on the model, whether it's brick and mortar or service. Um, what kind of team and what kind of intellectual capital that you have. Luckily, we're fortunate at Rolling Suds to have a lot of intellectual capital, and then I raised capital as well, so we have financial capital to do this. I know how much it costs to get a unit opened. I know what kind of staff is necessary to support the franchisee. and I know all the logistics and the technology in order to get them open in an efficient way with suppliers that can pick up, that can do certain things like client tether as an example. You know, you guys help with software for me, making sure franchisees get onboarded the right way, and then
Mhm.
um, the integrations that we have. So there's technology there, but basically, as a franchisor, you can only do so much. So let's just talk a little bit about suppliers. You
Yeah.
have to vet suppliers. In our industry, we call them suppliers. They may be called vendors in other industries, but these are people who provide services to franchisees. As a franchisor, you can't be the call center. You can't be everything. So you have to figure out, what am I going to do to support franchisees, and what do I need to outsource? And typically that's marketing, it's CRM, it's payroll, it's bookkeeping, it's other things like that. So you figure out what you're providing to your franchisees,
Yep.
and then how to get them that. And then because you're a franchisor, you get to negotiate and you have buying power. And
Mhm.
that's one of the benefits that a franchisee gets to tap into, is that buying power. So then you negotiate discounts for franchisees. So for me, I know that I want to be overstaffed on the front end so that franchisees come in and they get the support they pay us for. Because the most important people to a franchisees to the franchise system, are arguably the first 10 to 15 franchisees.
Yeah.
Because without successful franchisees in those first 10 to 15, it becomes very hard to scale. Um, and so my advice to an emerging franchisor would be, figure out, what's your growth rate look like? What's the cash burn to get to that growth rate? And at what point will you be bringing in enough royalties in order to pay for a lot of your expenses?
Yeah.
And what does that run rate look like? And then basically work backwards from there and say, okay, because of that, I need this amount of capital.
Mhm.
The other thing I would recommend is, if you are going to an FSO, as which is in for those who don't know, a franchise sales organization,
Mhm.
which would be an organization that would sell franchises for you.
Give us a few examples, because a lot of the folks may or may not know who is an FSO.
Yeah, so some of the big ones are Franchise Fastlane,
Mhm.
Rep'em, Brand One, Rhino 7. Um, there are a few different franchise sales organizations. I mean, there's a ton of them, but those I think are some of the top five probably. I don't know if you have other ones, but
No, no, I was just going to throw Ryan Zinks out there because I know he just started another one as well. Yeah,
oh
but
yeah, Franchise Sidekick, which is a
yeah,
little bit different. It's kind of like
kind of a hybrid.
it's
Yeah,
an FSO, but a little bit different. Yeah.
yeah.
So a few things there. You need to know who your buyer is, who's your perfect candidate, and then set the proper expectation with the FSO that that's the candidate you're looking for.
Mhm.
And if it is advised that there needs to be an element of absentee and semi-absentee ownership to your model, but that's not something that will work in your model, don't change your model, find another solution, because the last thing you want to do is get the wrong people into the system, because it's really hard to rewind and start over, and
Yeah,
it's also really expensive.
yeah.
Um,
Can I pause you there for a
uh,
minute, Aaron? Because I want to
yeah,
I want to dig into that for a second. This concept that you're talking about is really critical, because a lot of folks, they want to maybe sell their own franchises, or they want to send it out to brokers. No matter how you sell it, if you're not the one controlling the sales process, whether that's through brokers or FSOs, that's fine. But you've got to. I just want to reiterate what you said. You've got to make sure you're focused in on training the FSO, training the brokers, even training your staff if you're selling in house, on who the right candidate is and why they're the right candidate and how to find the right candidate. Because what you can't do is do what I've seen a lot of brands do and just say, sweet, they're coming in, let's go, close them. And then you get your first 10, your first 15, and then you freeze and you backslide to 8 because they weren't the right
right,
candidates. They weren't the right fit. They didn't have the right liquid capital, or they just weren't the right personality for the brand. They didn't have the passion. There are a lot of people out there that can help people find franchises to purchase. But if you don't get the right 10 up front, you're hosed, because your item 19 is going to stink. Your attrition rate looks bad. Your AUV doesn't look right. And then this all circles back to what you're talking about with support staff too. We'll come back to that, but it kind of hamstrings you for the next year or two. And if you're working on a broker network and you backslide early and you have a bad experience and some of their franchisees fail and they're getting phone calls from people that are like, hey, you screwed me over. Like your
Yeah,
reputation across the whole network will just plummet. And so
right.
it can actually destroy that whole channel for you for the life of the brand. So just to be aware, like this is really
Right.
serious. You got to think it through and the implications. So sorry to interrupt you, Aaron, but I just want to make sure we
No, no,
cover.
no, that's fine. And I've spoken to emerging brands who have spoken to certain franchise sales organizations, and they have told them that unless they can basically say that their business can eventually become absentee or semi-absentee,
Mhm.
they won't take them on as a and so they adjusted to their detriment their acceptance of certain candidates in order to be relevant within the broker community or seemingly relevant within the broker community. So as I advise I talk to a lot of emerging franchisors. I love giving free advice to emerging franchisors. It gets me going when I get to talk to someone who's like, I have a painting business. What do I do? Because it's so exciting to be able to provide a solution for people to build generational wealth and then watch them do it and kind of hold their hand through that process. And so staying firm on what your specific buyer looks like, what they need to do on a day-to-day basis, and then coaching whoever it is that's selling your franchise system and awarding franchises and doing all of that, that's exactly what you need no matter what, is going to be really beneficial to you long term.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Well, Aaron, you rapid fired through about 4 categories of content. I want to dive deeper. I mean, I hope you guys can see Aaron. He's got no script, right? This is just him riffing of like knowledge that that he's developed over the years. A lot of it learned the hard way, and also just developed over time being methodical. So, Aaron, let's dive into a couple of these in a little bit more depth. The first one
Sure.
that comes to my mind is infrastructure and support, and we split that into two things. There's people and there's technology, right? And I just want to
Yep.
make a point because you kind of hinted at it, but it's not all about hiring staff for everything. You also have to
Right.
know when is there a partner, a supplier, vendor, whatever you want to call them, that can offload that for me. You mentioned call center, right? I know you've got a good call center partner that's going to do lead setting and appointment setting for your or lead qualification appointment setting for your franchise units. You have to also be creative, realizing you might incur a monthly expense for a service
Right.
or a technology that creates massive scale for your team and makes it so you as the emerging franchisor isn't tying up capital and resources and brain trust at the corporate level to build everything in house. At some point, you will, right? At some point, well, I've got 4 or 5
Yep.
brands now that are sliding away from an outsourced call center into an in-house call team, but some of them have 100 units now. They've got a very different
Yeah.
cash
Right.
model.
It's a different, yeah.
But would you talk about that? Let's talk about that balance and also how do you structure that team? Who are critical roles that you need? So they're starting to think
Yep.
in terms of who do I invest in?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So for me and my team, what I know we're really strong at is franchise development, finding the right franchisees and supporting those franchisees. So at Rolling Suds, we consider ourselves a franchisee company, as opposed to a franchisor, because a franchisee company says exactly what we do. We support and train and focus on the success of our franchisees. So for us, we had to look at, okay, what are we good at? And then what do we want to outsource to someone who's better at it than we are? And so I don't outsource franchise development because I do that in-house. I know exactly what we're looking for. I know how to target them. I know how to find the right people and also set the right and the proper expectations.
Yeah.
Um, the VP of operations that I've hired, he has extensive experience in recruiting and scaling businesses to, tens, lots of trucks, and then exiting those businesses as well as creating infrastructure for back end franchise systems. So, from a logistics perspective and a coaching perspective, we're great. Now, we're outsourcing call center because we don't want to invest in two or $300,000 in bringing a call center in house and training agents and creating standard operating procedures. We'd rather just use ProNexus for that, for example.
Right.
Um, Marketing, we don't have a marketing company in-house. So we went and vetted different marketing suppliers that could provide resources for franchisees for lead gen. And then we developed relationships with them so that franchisees can get set up and have leads coming in while they're at training, just like we did with the Patch Boys. So
Mhm.
we'll turn leads on at training for franchisees. And then we also turn that call center on there, right? So um, as you just have to figure out what you're good at and what services you want to provide, and then what team you need to put in place in order to provide those services.
Mhm.
Ultimately, that's what a franchisor is it's a, or it's a company that provides services in return for a royalty.
Mhm.
And so those services need to constantly get better and be innovative in order to keep justifying the royalty coming in. And
Yeah.
so there's a bunch of different elements of a franchise system that they provide: marketing support, hiring support, ongoing support, launch support, a community to be a part of, um, variety of different things. So every franchisor needs to think about, how am I going to provide each one of those services,
Mhm.
and what am I going to do in house, and what am I going to outsource? And and so I think that's like a good thought exercise is, what am I giving to franchisees, and why are they paying me a royalty? It's
Yeah.
not just because I have a cool brand and a cool logo, right?
Mhm. Although
What am I doing?
you do have a cool brand and a cool logo, to be fair.
Thank you.
That is not the primary reason, right? Why they're paying you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're really strong in training, ongoing support, launch support, like just supporting from a training and a strategy perspective, on an ongoing basis. So we outsource marketing, we outsource call center, we outsource bookkeeping, we outsource, and these are things that we've basically negotiated relationships for franchisees. And so I'm of the opinion that you need to take as much off of the plate of your franchisee as possible,
Mhm. Yeah.
so that they can go focus on growing the business. They don't want to go find a bookkeeping company, because that's your job, in my opinion, or my job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I
hope
want
that's
to,
helpful.
yeah, it's very helpful. So you mentioned something before, but I want to come back to it because you've done a mind map and said, this is what we are the best at, right? Like Aaron, I've known you for a while. You're an amazing franchise developer, and you're also an ethical franchise developer. Those two don't often coincide in the
Yeah,
same person. Uh,
right.
so, so yeah, if you're looking at this brand, guys, and you met Aaron, like just I know you can trust this guy, right? I would if I had a friend
Thank
who
you.
was working, I'd be like, call Aaron. Like that's a great concept. I know he's going to treat you right and get you launched effectively. But you've had to
Thank
say,
you.
this is what I'm an expert at. I am legitimately an expert at franchise development. And you mentioned I have an operator who is an expert at operating. He knows how to operate, get people in their multi-truck situations to be successful, but everything in between that, that's not, and so he focuses on coaching, mentoring, training, right? So you guys have got
Correct.
your brain trust where you've got your intellectual capital that's the strongest. You focus on those two things, and then everything else, you're like, well,
Right.
bookkeeping, no, marketing, no, the call center, no. You start finding strategic partners to outsource those things. So your
Right.
franchisees have essentially like a turnkey solution to say, all right, day one, you're going to go into the market. No, here's your call center and this and that. Oh, and your leads are already flowing, and then you guys focus your limited
Yeah.
brain trust because you don't have unlimited time on the things you're the best at,
Right.
training and coaching and franchise development. Is that a fair summary
That,
statement?
that's exactly right. It's just like our model is residential and commercial power washing. We do residential and commercial power washing. Our franchisees will do residential and commercial power washing better than any other company out there in the United States that does residential and commercial power washing. But we don't mess with gutters or window cleaning or window installation, because those are different businesses.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah.
different businesses that require different skill sets, different different training. Window cleaning is a much different service than doing roof washing. So we just focus on the niche of power washing. So if you look at it from a franchisor perspective, like I'm really good at franchise development, overall strategy, vision, long-term 10-year plan.
Yeah.
And my VP of operations is really good at like tactical. This is how you get out in your marketplace. This is how you scale to 3 or 4 or 5 trucks.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then everything else, we still, in my opinion, you still need to provide resources for,
Yeah.
in order to justify someone paying a royalty.
Yeah. And some folks they get I've noticed they kind of are begrudgingly doing that, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to pay for this thing. But it's either you do it in house and pay twice as much for it up front, or you find someone who can do it for you, and
Right.
it distributes your expense model out, right? So
Yep.
you're not royalty independent when you first get started. So you've got to be cautious how much internal costing you bring onto the franchisor that you then distribute out. You also have to make sure it aligns with your ad fund and your tech fund and whatever other funds you've got coming through. And
Yep.
but you mentioned working capital before. Now let's talk about that. And this is the scary part of
Sure.
this, because this is where a lot of franchise brands feel like they're gambling a little bit. Like, oh
Yeah.
well, but it doesn't have to. It actually can be very methodical, and there can be a very good run rate. You mentioned the term run rate. What's my run rate? My burn rate? So let's talk about why, as you're an emerging brand, do you need to have capital to operate, and how do you deploy that capital? Like, how do you
Sure.
forecast what you need? You highlighted it, but I'd like to dive into that a little bit for these guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So before I started doing this, I mapped out what the next 5 years would look like if I added X number of franchisees.
Mhm.
I started with like a reasonable first month performance for a franchisee, and then what that growth on a month to month basis would look like on a conservative level.
Mhm.
And then I modeled that out, and I figured out when I would need to add staff. You're typically supposed to have, the industry standard is a business coach for every 20 to 25 franchisees.
Mhm.
Me and the VP of operations, we both have pretty strong business coaching abilities. And we also, hired an operations coordinator recently as well, who has a lot of experience in supply chain and logistics, um, and figuring out profitability for different organizations and different projects within those organizations. So I think that every single franchisor needs to figure out exactly what, at the very least, the next 3 years are going to look like, and what the goal is for 3 years from now, and the expenses that are going to be necessary in order to get there. And if you work backwards from 3 or 5 years or whatever, you can kind of see, okay, how much capital do I need now in order to get to 10 units open, let's just say,
Mhm. Yeah.
assuming that no money is going to come in during that time.
Yeah.
Um, we're fortunate in the sense that the way I do franchise development, we are able to bring capital in, from franchise sales, but those who outsource franchise sales and development might actually be paying, consider losing money on that. So I
Mhm.
think understanding what you have to understand what that monthly cash burn is going to look like if
Mhm.
you add a certain number of franchisees, and then also what you need to support those franchisees so that a year or 2 or 3 years from now, they actually have the support they need to generate the revenue that's going to produce the royalties in order to continue to grow the business.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to say that, because a lot of folks
Yeah.
don't think of it. So I'll reiterate, guys. You might have missed what Aaron was saying about the franchise fees. A lot of folks, they depend upon those, and they expect to be able to reinvest those in the business. But if you're using an outsourced model, you're going to spend most of that on the commission, right?
Mhm.
And or other fees. So if you make your whole business model when you're doing this, is called a pro forma, by the way, guys. If you're working with
Yeah.
investors to raise capital, they're going to ask you for pro formas. Aaron's describing a pro forma where you're
Yep.
forecasting out what are my expenses, what are my incomes, my revenues, but your only incomes and revenues you should be estimating on that should be your royalty income and revenue. And so you got to figure out how to become royalty independent and not worry about those franchise fees. Yes, if you're selling directly, you'll probably sell fewer units, but you'll have more money to keep. Forget about that money and just focus on
Yeah.
being royalty independent. Is that a fair
Yep.
restatement?
Completely fair. And I mean, it's pretty industry accepted that as an emerging franchisor, you're going to lose money basically for the first 2.5 to 3 years.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you have a strong corporate location, you're going to need to reinvest that capital from that corporate location into your franchise system. There just needs to be funneling of capital going back into the franchise system I see so many times that people come in and say, I want to be a franchisor, but they don't have the capital necessary to do it. And
Yeah.
then they pay $100,000 to become a franchise because they got an FTD and an operations manual. And then they go to get, to a sales organization, and then they need to probably spend somewhere about 150,000 plus for all the broker networks and the monthly fees and the conventions and the conferences and the leads. And so that's $250,000 before before the franchise system is even open, really, before
Yeah.
you've even got one unit. And you're going to need another 500,000 or more, depending on what your growth trajectory looks like. And I feel like I actually was, when I was out in Utah when we were at the unconference, I sat down with Matt Haller,
Uh-huh.
and we sat and talked, and it's like there needs to be some level of education for franchisors who say I want to be a franchisor, to say, hey, this is what it's going to take
Yeah.
to do this responsibly. And I believe personally in responsible franchising. I think that in order, we have a duty to franchisees to provide services to them, and deliver on the promises that we make. And if they're the expectation of capital necessary to get there is not accurate, then you don't have the ability to deliver on the promises.
Right.
And so I think it's so important to say, okay, what does my pro forma look like? What's my cash burn? And as a result, how much money do I need to have?
Right. Yeah, that's a wonderful summary of it, because a lot of folks don't look at it that way. They don't realize I need to have the head of operations to do training, coaching, mentoring. That can't usually be you as the founder,
It's
right?
hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard.
Well, not if
Yeah.
you're also selling. If you're selling and supporting, and you're also checking in on your corporate store operations to make sure you're going to stink at all three, right? You really
There's only, yeah,
have to pick a pony. And sometimes founders, you're going to be the best at operating the local unit and then training people how to
yeah,
operate a local unit. Sometimes that's what you're really going to be the best at. You might not going to be that great at selling units. Outsource it. Call Aaron. He
yeah.
knows the right people to talk to, right? And if you don't know how to operate and coach your units up, then get that person in if you're great at selling them. But
Yeah,
usually I find they're good at one, but not the other. And so they need to stay
sure.
focused. Staff, hire somebody to do it. You don't want to outsource coaching. At least I haven't seen that work amazingly.
Yeah.
You wanted that to be in-house.
You're the only one who knows your business in the way that it needs to be taught. So training and coaching I think, absolutely needs to be done in-house. That should be the core of what we're doing as a franchisor.
Yeah.
So
I agree. Now you mentioned something too. You've got a number, right? You've got a number where you've done the math, you've done the pro formas, you've done this before. So you know it's going to cost me X number of dollars to open a unit.
what I would recommend an emerging franchisor to raise, just in full transparency, I think that an emerging franchisor needs to raise probably about $1 million.
Mhm.
Because that intellectual capital for someone who owns a tree business, the intellectual capital is around how to run the tree business. It's not around how to be a franchisor.
Right.
And so that what that inevitably means is there's going to be more trial and error, which means the cash burn rate is going to be higher and faster. Just like if I, as a franchisor, was going to go step into a tree business that I knew nothing about,
Mhm.
I'd spend more money making mistakes in opening a tree business with no experience there.
Mhm.
So if you look at that from a parallel perspective, if you go into an industry that you know nothing about, you want to raise more capital than you think you need so that you have room to make those mistakes. Now, if
Yeah.
you go find a CEO that has franchising experience, or you partner with someone who's bringing that capital, or you become part of a platform brand that, like Threshold or Horsepower that incubates, or Franchise Playbook or whatever that incubates brands, like that's a different story because they're doing all the franchising side of things, right? So you get to just keep running your tree business, but not everyone wants to do that.
Mhm.
So my recommendation would be probably somewhere around 1 million. If it's a four-walled structure, you're minimum $2 million that you need to have minimum.
Yeah.
If that's your model.
Mhm.
But these are just some broad strokes.
Yeah. What I love about it is a lot of folks they've been business owners but haven't been involved in the capital world. I've been in there a little bit as well myself, raising
Yeah.
funds and things and this and other companies I've been at. But 410 is a pretty conservative number, guys. If you think about capital raises, and one of the reasons that you want to be as low as possible too up front is because there's higher risk. And so for 410K, I won't ask you, but usually you're going to give up a lot more ownership in the company per dollar at an early seed stage or pre-seed stage of
Correct.
investment. And so if you wait longer, where you've got a proven run rate, track rate, recurring royalties coming in, and then you go and ask for money, they're buying a lot less of the company for more money. So the longer you can wait, the better, but you have to have it. I would also think of it
Correct.
like this. If you don't have $1 million lump sum, but you do have, let's say you got $120,000 a month of recurring cash coming into your business. Well, if you can partition 85K per month out of your cash flow
Yes.
operating units, that's $1 million, right? So you got to think of it one of two ways. Can I siphon off X number of dollars of cash flow from my current business and keep it afloat? Because I know some people that are siphoning off of their operating unit or units, and it's making it a little scary. Like they're operating with razor thin margins. They're not paying themselves much.
Yep.
So if you're operating in that mode and now you're suffering a little bit on the unit level operations, be very careful because that's also going to hit your AUV numbers, your item 19s. So you got to balance that carefully. But I know some folks that are cash flush and they can afford to, rather than go raise capital, they can actually amortize that cost out and have the money regularly to pay the bill. But you got to pay for people.
Yep.
You got to pay for your marketing. You got to pay for these things. So you got to make sure you got the money for it. And either way works, but it's that number, it still matters. The $1 million mark, I'd have to agree with you, Aaron. I think the people
Yeah.
that aren't getting that kind of capital or don't have that kind of cash flow to infuse into the business, they're just creeping along and they're not succeeding.
Yeah. And no one, to be like extra clear, no one wants to hear that. That's why no one tells them that. And that's why no one, you
It's
know
true.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
no one wants to a franchisor who wants to franchise their dog business doesn't want to be told, doesn't want to hear that they need to have $1 million or $800,000.
Yeah.
Um, the person who's willing to franchise the business, get the FDD, all that kind of stuff, they don't want to tell them that because they don't want to hear it. So I think like just the reality of it is like that capital needs to be there. Um, and to be clear, I had a lot of people who wanted to give me more money, but I knew that was what I needed. I didn't want to give away more of the company. This is what I wanted to raise. Once we get units open, which we're probably going to launch about 25 units here in the next 5 months.
No.
Territories sold. So I know for a fact that I could go back and be like, hey guys, we need more capital. So yes, to your point, there are many ways to skin a cat. You can go get a loan. If you have a $2, $3, $4 million insulation business, you can take some of the capital from that and allocate it towards franchising, but you
Yeah.
need money to become a franchisor. It can't just be I hired an FSO and now I'm a franchisor, and I have an FTD and now I'm a franchisor, because the franchisees you sign up will suffer. And
Mhm.
I do not, I hate seeing that. It hurts me because I believe we have this incredible industry that can provide, the golden nugget of entrepreneurship to franchisees.
Yeah.
And so we have kind of a responsibility to help people get there. And so how do we do that? And how can we be responsible about how to do that? And ultimately, if you raise $1 million, even or $2 million, whatever it is, and you are able to launch 25, 35 franchisees and they're successful, those royalties that they generate because of their success will more than pay back that loan over the course of years, or justify that equity or whatever.
Right.
And so just thinking about it from a responsible perspective of how much money do I need to grow this thing, and how big do I want to grow it, and how fast
Yeah.
do I want to get there?
Mhm.
These are serious questions that every franchisor, every emerging franchisor needs to ask, and then design the go-to-market strategy around what the answers of those things are.
Yeah. And there's so many case studies, and we don't need to get into the bad ones, but so many case studies in the industry of people that grew. They sold 200 units in a year, and they had 5 open, and they went bankrupt, right?
Right.
They closed up shop. And you think
Right.
200 units, if you think about the average license fee per unit that was coming through, like sometimes it seems almost criminal. Like, what the heck did you do with all the capital? Somebody got some money. Like, it's insane to me. Like, how
It's insane.
yeah, it is. But I
It's
I thought of
insane.
I thought of a funny quote, man, as we're wrapping this up. You ever seen the movie The Princess Bride?
Yeah.
So
Long time ago.
there's a funny quote in there when you almost said it word for word, but like he says life is pain. And anyone who says differently is selling something. Like,
Yeah.
franchising is kind of painful. Franchising
Yeah.
is expensive, and anyone who's telling you otherwise is trying to sell you something. So
Yeah.
anyway, dude, you've been fantastic. So I think
Thank
we
you.
could do 2 or 3 more episodes just on some of the lessons that you learned. I'll probably pull you back in at some point. Now,
Happy to come back.
like the year mark, and be like, okay, you did it. Now what? Now what'd you learn? But I sure appreciate you sharing all these thoughts, guys. I want to recap. So you need to pay attention to the investments that you need to have on hand so you can successfully franchise. You need to have the right people in place, and you need to have the right partners in place to offset the people you'd otherwise need to handle the services that your franchise need. I think Aaron said it great. The franchisor's role is to provide the services that will make the franchisees successful, whether that's in-house or outsourced. You got to have it all lined up. It's got to be turnkey. And then you need to make sure you got the capital to make sure that's all running properly and that you're coaching them properly so they're successfully getting to 2, 3, 4 trucks in his case,
Yep.
or 2, 3, 4 open locations in other cases. That if you don't have those things in place now, pause, rethink your strategy, get
Yep.
the capital, and then you can really effectively deploy and be a responsible franchisor that will become royalty independent and have a great reputation.
Yes.
Anything you'd add,
Yep.
Aaron?
It's easy, guys. It's so easy.
Wow. Yeah, we'll end on that note. It's so easy. Yeah, so easy, Aaron. That's why
So
everybody
easy.
does it, right?
That's why everyone said it's so easy. No, I love it. The only thing I'll add is like for those thinking about franchising, whether you want to become a franchisee or a franchisor, this is hands down the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. Helping people become entrepreneurs and giving them a path to become successful entrepreneurs that they otherwise wouldn't have or would have to spend more capital and make more mistakes to get there.
Mhm.
It's the coolest thing ever. And if being able to step into an industry where people like me and Dave can sit and have these conversations, like it's incredible, just the thought sharing and the knowledge sharing and everything. And I do believe there's a way to do it responsibly and successfully, and is in the benefit of franchisees.
Mhm.
And so it's my goal and my mission to do that through the rest of my life. And so just can't say enough good things about franchising.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end. Aaron, if people want to reach out to you, connect with you on LinkedIn, would that be a good way for people to connect?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My name's Aaron Harper, or you can go to rollingsudsfranchise.com and hit request information if you're interested in becoming a franchisee, or you can just go on LinkedIn, and my email address is aaron.harper@rollingsudsfranchise.com.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's how you get a hold of me.
Yeah, you're a good man, Aaron, and
Thank you.
you're highlighting something that I've just been fascinated with and love about this industry is everyone's willing to share. You can go sit down
Yeah.
with a competitor that's got 500 units, and they'll sit down and have dinner with you and tell you about their story and laugh about your
Yeah.
struggles. And like, it's such a giving community. It seems almost fake at first, but it's
Yeah.
actually it's real, and I love that.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, thanks for giving up your time. I know you're crazy busy. Good luck with those first 25, man, and let me know how I can help you.
Thank you. I will.
Thanks. See you, Aaron.